They came with the Bible in one hand and the flag in the other. This haunting line has echoed across centuries of history. Wherever the missionaries went, the empire followed. And wherever the empire planted its flag, the missionaries were already there preaching salvation, but also laying the foundations for control. Today, we uncover the hidden story of Christian evangelism, how it served both the spiritual and political ambitions of European empires. Was it about saving souls or subduing minds? This is Conversion and Control, the dual mission of Christian evangelism. Welcome to Sands of History, where we bring to life the forgotten stories that shaped our world, stories of faith, power, and resistance. If you enjoy deep dives into global history, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and help us grow by supporting us through the links in the description below. The spiritual mission, a divine call or imperial tool. In the early modern era, Europe was on the move. Explorers, traders, and conquerors were carving out empires across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Alongside them traveled another group, the missionaries. To many Europeans, Christian evangelism was a sacred duty, a divine command to spread the gospel to the heathen and uncivilized. The Great Commission of Jesus, "Go and make disciples of all nations," Matthew chapter 28-19, became a moral banner under which empires expanded. The Portuguese and Spanish were among the first. After Columbus' voyages, the papal bulls of the late 15th century, especially the doctrine of discovery, granted Christian monarchs divine authority to claim lands inhabited by non-Christians, provided they converted the local populations. Missionary work thus became deeply intertwined with conquest. In Latin America, Franciscan and Jesuit missions aimed to convert indigenous peoples. But conversion often meant far more than baptism. It demanded a total transformation of identity. Indigenous languages, rituals, and cosmologies were suppressed. New Christian names and European clothing were imposed. The spiritual conquest became the cultural foundation for colonial rule. The political dimension, conversion as control, but behind the cross stood the crown. While missionaries preached redemption, colonial administrators saw conversion as a form of governance. The missionary was not only a preacher, he was an agent of order, discipline, and often surveillance. In Africa, for instance, mission schools and churches were the earliest outposts of European influence. Before soldiers arrived, missionaries mapped the land, studied the people, and reported back valuable ethnographic details, all in the name of saving souls. In British India, this dynamic became particularly visible. The Charter Act of 1813 opened India to missionary activity, sparking debates in Parliament. Many East India Company officials opposed it, fearing that religious interference would destabilize rule. Yet others saw in it a useful tool, an instrument to civilize Indian society. Missionaries introduced English education, biblical morality, and Western science. But these were not neutral gifts. They created a new class of English-speaking elites, clerks, translators, and bureaucrats who helped run the colonial machine. Historian Thomas Macaulay famously declared in 1835 that the goal was to create a class of persons, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. Conversion thus became not just about religion, but about reshaping entire societies in the image of Europe. Mission stations, the empire's outposts. Across Africa and the Pacific, mission stations functioned as microcosms of empire. They were schools, churches, farms, and training centers, but also laboratories of social control. Missionaries often banned local dances, music, and dress. They replaced indigenous names with Christian ones. They reorganized family life, enforcing monogamy and patriarchal authority modeled on European norms. In southern Africa, the London Missionary Society and the Dutch Reformed Church played dual roles, preaching the gospel while justifying racial hierarchies that would later evolve into apartheid ideology. Converts were sometimes rewarded with access to land, education, or employment privileges denied to those who resisted conversion. This moral reform was not innocent. It fractured communities, divided families, and created new social categories: the Christian and the heathen, the civilized and the savage. Such divisions made colonized populations easier to manage. Mission stations also doubled as centers of intelligence. Missionaries learned local languages, customs, and politics information eagerly used by colonial authorities. In some regions, their reports guided military campaigns or influenced administrative policies. The missionary thus became both the teacher and the spy, the healer and the herald of conquest. Gender, family, and the civilizing mission. Evangelism was not limited to the soul. It penetrated the intimate spaces of family and gender. European missionaries viewed indigenous women as symbols of backwardness, victims needing rescue from barbaric traditions. Missionary schools for girls taught domesticity, sewing, and Christian modesty, reinforcing European ideals of womanhood. In reality, this often erased indigenous forms of matriarchy, communal child-rearing, and spiritual authority held by women. In Africa, Asia, and the Pacific Islands, women who once served as priestesses, healers, or community leaders found themselves marginalized under Christian patriarchy. By reshaping family structures and gender roles, missions helped establish social orders more compatible with colonial administration, hierarchical, disciplined, and patriarchal. Economic control and cultural erasure. Beneath the language of salvation lay economics. Missionary work often paved the way for capitalist expansion. Mission schools trained locals for the colonial labor market. Mission farms introduced cash crops that fed European industries, and mission hospitals often softened local resistance to colonial presence. Conversion was thus an economic as well as cultural strategy. It produced a disciplined, educated, and obedient workforce, a population taught to equate Christian virtue with loyalty, humility, and industriousness. The cultural cost was immense. Entire belief systems, animism, ancestor worship, and polytheism were labeled superstition. Sacred groves were cut down, temples destroyed, and oral traditions silenced. By converting the soul, missionaries sought to erase the memory, the deep historical consciousness of colonized civilizations. The language of light and darkness, one of the most powerful tools of missionary control, was language itself. Missionary writings framed non-Christian societies as living in darkness, awaiting the light of the gospel. This metaphor justified both evangelism and empire. To rule others, one first had to define them as lost. This duality, light versus dark, civilized versus savage, structured colonial discourse. It allowed violence to masquerade as benevolence and domination to disguise itself as moral duty. Yet, ironically, the same Bible that was used to legitimize conquest also contained stories of resistance, of Moses leading his people out of bondage, of prophets challenging kings. In time, these stories would inspire colonized Christians to challenge imperial power. Post-colonial legacies, the afterlife of evangelism. Even after decolonization, the legacy of missionary evangelism endures. Across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, Christianity remains one of the most powerful social forces. Churches run schools, hospitals, and charities, but they also continue to influence politics, gender norms, and identity. In some regions, neo-colonial forms of evangelism persist, now tied to global capitalism. Western missionary organizations fund megachurches and media networks that promote Western values under religious guise. The old formula remains. Conversion brings control, though the empires are now cultural and digital rather than territorial. At the same time, indigenous and post-colonial churches are reclaiming Christianity, reinterpreting it in local idioms, celebrating African, Asian, and Latin American theologies that center justice and liberation. Conclusion. Faith, power, and the human soul. The story of Christian evangelism in the age of empire is not a simple tale of good versus evil. It is a story of faith entangled with power of genuine belief, weaponized by ambition. For many missionaries, the gospel was indeed a message of hope. For others, it became a mask for domination. And for those who were converted, it was both a wound and a source of strength, a tool of oppression that could also be turned into a weapon of freedom. The dual mission of evangelism, conversion and control, shaped our modern world in ways still unfolding. To understand it is not to condemn faith, but to confront the ways in which religion can serve both God and empire. Thank you for watching Sands of History, where we uncover the untold stories that lie beneath the surface of civilization. If you found this exploration meaningful, please like, share, and subscribe. It truly helps us grow. And if you'd like to support our research and storytelling, you can do so through the links in the description below. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and keep exploring the sands of history.